Hello and welcome to our cutting tutorial. I'm going to be showing you how to cut out your pieces in fabric in preparation for stitching them together. To do that, we're going to use our patterns. If you're new to making clothes, the pattern is the shape of your garment and the information on it is what we use to piece the garment together in the correct way. The information of your pattern is broken up into 4 important points that we need to take note of. The notches around the edge of your pattern are really important. This tells us the type of seam that we're going to be sewing, and it tells us essentially garment construction information. Every pattern is slightly different, and at the beginning of your tutorials, the seam allowance will be explained to you. This one here, for example, we have a wider seam allowance on the side seam, and we have a slightly shorter seam allowance on the shoulder seam here. Along with our notches on the corners of the patterns, those are our seam allowances, we do have notches in the middle of straight lines as well. So these are also very important, as that kind of helps us piece the panels together. If there's a tricky shape or if we have a really long panel, it marks as little pointers to help us just confirm that our fabric is sitting in the right place. The second piece of information that you will get on some pattern pieces is holes in the middle of your pattern. Now on this pattern, these holes are marking pocket placements. Holes can also mark areas for buttons, for buttonholes, stitching details, or any other slightly unusual design features. The third piece of information that is vital for cutting the fabric out is your grain line, which is a straight line marked on each pattern piece. This is telling you the direction to place your pattern against your selvage on your fabric. So I'm going to be showing you how to do that in a minute. This grain line is really important for making sure that your garment is washable, and that when you wash something and wear something, the seams aren't going to start twisting to the side like it can do a lot, especially on jersey. So you want to pay attention to that. And then the final piece of information is the cutting instructions, and this will tell us what the pattern piece is. So if it's the front, the back or the sleeve, it will tell us how many to cut 1 pair, cut single, cut 3, cut 4, and it will tell us the size. So once you've cut out your pattern piece, we're now ready to cut the fabric pieces out, ready to sew. To get your fabric ready to cut your pattern pieces out, I would personally recommend putting it through the washing machine to begin with. This will make sure that your garment is machine washable, as it will get all the shrinkage out of the fabric before you make the garment and then wash it. So put it through the wash at 30 or 40. If you don't have a machine washable fabric, just give it a good steam instead. Once you've washed it, I would iron it and get all the creases out. I have placed my fabric on the table here. I want to talk about the right side and wrong side of fabrics, as that's really key to making garments. Sometimes it's quite hard to tell. If you've got a print, it'll be very clear if you've got the right side or wrong side. This fabric has a slight shine on the right side, and it's a little bit more dull on the inside of the fabric. Sometimes it is quite hard to tell, so just test in different lights, have a really good look. And then to mark the wrong side of the fabric, sometimes it's helpful just to get some chalk and mark the wrong side, and then you remember which side you're working with as the correct side. The other thing to think about is direction of fabric. So again, if you have a print, you might have an upside down, a right way up of the print, and it'll be very clear. Other fabrics, it can be a bit harder to tell. Sometimes you have a brushed effect on the surface, and again, just in the light, give it a brush with your hand and see how the light's reflecting off it. Most of the time, the direction of the fabric, you'll want it going down your body. Just have a little play and check what you're happy with your particular fabric. To get it into place, I'm folding my fabric selvage to selvage. That means that the long edge of the fabric is sitting on the opposite edge of the fabric. So long edge to long edge. Your selvage is essentially the side points of the fabric where it will be attached to the loom. And we want those meeting each other before we start to cut and place our pattern pieces. I would also check that you've ironed your selvage down so that it's not wobbly. Sometimes they can come a little bit folded or creased. So just check it's sitting nicely next to each other. Mine isn't actually, just here, so I'll pull and make sure the edges are meeting nicely. Now that we've got our fabric laid out on the table, we can start to place the pattern pieces. So just to be extra careful, I want to make sure that I'm not going to be cutting fabric through 2 layers with part of the underlayer missing. That's quite an easy mistake to make, and it does result in wasting quite a lot of fabric. So once I've got my edge lined up here, I'm just going to take a piece of chalk, or you can use pins to mark yours, or a pencil. I'm just going to mark where the fabric ends underneath in a nice clear dashed line. And this just helps me to make sure that I'm going to get 2 full pieces of fabric and not 1 full piece and the second with the bottom missing. So do that with both the top and the bottom of your fabrics. And next we can start to place our pattern pieces. This is where your grain line starts to become really important, and you need to make sure this long line on the front, sometimes it's a shorter line on a pattern piece such as a collar, just whichever line you're using, make sure that's parallel to your selvage. You can also use your farthest fold of fabric to match up your line against, because that is also running parallel to your selvage. Think of it as train tracks. Everything is like a grid, and the way that the fabric is woven is in long lines, and we want everything just in line so that the garment has a really nice structure and doesn't start to twist as we're wearing and washing it. So I'm just going to start to place my pattern pieces. On pattern pieces with the grain line parallel to any straight edge, I can use the straight edge and by eye place that along our folded edge here, and just start to get a feel of how the pieces are going to fit on the fabric. I can see this isn't quite going to fit here, so I'll make some space further up the fabric, and this can probably go here. This is sort of like a jigsaw. We just want everything slotted in and wasting as little fabric as possible. So definitely make sure you're laying everything out and having a good look before you get your scissors anywhere near the fabric. So I've got my pattern pieces laid out here. Just be super careful that you're not cutting fusing pieces in your fabric. So we do have some pieces that are cut in fusing only, and we also have some pieces that are cut in pocket bag only, which will be a different fabric. So just read the instructions on the front of the pattern and make sure you're cutting the right pieces in the right material. So I've got my pieces into place here. I'm just going to start to roughly pin around the edges. If you have an asymmetrical pattern at any point in the future, most Henry pieces are all symmetrical, our garments are all pretty similar in that respect. So you will usually be cutting a pair of pieces. If at some point in the future you're cutting a slightly more complicated pattern, just be really aware that if you're cutting a single piece of something, you need to cut that with the right side of the fabric facing you and the right side of the pattern facing you as well. So I'm starting to roughly pin, and I'm just going to check my grain line here by pinning the bottom. Just pinned the bottom of that grain line there, and I'm going to take my tape measure and measure from the grain line to the edge of the fabric here. So I've got 26.3. I'm then going to measure the top of the grain line as well. 26.3 is here. So I just need to twist that and make sure that is sitting in line. And we're going to do this for nearly every panel. The only panels I wouldn't do this for is if you're using very close space to the edges here and it's a square shape and you can literally just see that it sits along and that's in line. Pieces a bit further into the fabric, we're going to need to measure and just check.